Hey everybody, welcome to day 3 of the summit. Happy you are all here. Everybody having a good summit so far? Everybody see the keynote, all the cool stuff that we're releasing? Super excited about all of that. So happy you are here. My name is Thomas Russell. I'm a data strategist on the marketing analytics team. And I'm going to talk to you today about how we deployed Genie internally to turn 200 of our marketers into their own data analysts. First things first, forward-looking statement, blah, 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 legalese. This is all very important. Please pay attention. You'll see this in all the slides. If any of you are interested in training certification, take a quick snapshot of this where you can do some more deep dives into the bits and bytes about the Genie and how it works and gain some more skills there. So again, my name is Thomas Russell, data strategist, talking about how we leverage AI BI Genie internally. And what I'll be talking to you about today is an overview of what the Genie is. So some of you may not know what the Genie is. Hopefully you all do. But if you don't, I'll give you a brief overview so we're all on the same page. Talk about our team, how our team is structured, and why I think our team structure was important to being able to successfully deploy the Genie. Then talk a little bit about why we decided to leverage the Genie and what challenges we were facing that we hoped the Genie would solve. And spoiler alert, the Genie did actually solve them. And then talk about some more details. We're going to get into the weeds about some of the learnings we had as we were deploying it. So it'll get pretty technical, but hopefully not too technical. And then we'll pull back out the business impact and then wrap up. So what is the AI BI Genie? It's a no-code tool that will allow any user to ask a plain language question and get an answer. So you just type in how many contacts are there in EMEA. The Genie understands from the context what it is you're looking for. It will write a SQL query in the background, execute that SQL query, and then return the results to you. So it's super easy for anybody to go in and start using it. You don't need any technical knowledge, and you can start interrogating data and generating your own insights on the fly. This is how our team is structured. There are 3 main pillars to our team. Oh. Technical difficulties, one moment. All right, is this better? Okay, I like to talk with my hands, so this is gonna be a little bit tough for me, but we'll make do. Our team has 3 main pillars. One of them is the architecture team, or the architecture function. We have the engineering function, and we have the analytics and visualization function. The reason this is important is all 3 of these need to work hand in glove in order to successfully deploy a Genie. We're lucky that we have it all on one team. Not every organization is structured like this, so some of your companies may have these functions in independent teams. If that's the case, that's okay. It's not a deal breaker. I just want to call out that as they sit on different teams, they do still need to work together because as you're building your Genie, and you'll see from our experience, there will be a lot of iterations. And as you're iterating through, you want to make sure all 3 of these teams are working hand in glove, like I say, to make sure that the Genie deployment is successful. So why did we think that we needed to start using a Genie? Internally, we were spending about 25% of our time on tasks that were not necessarily value add. We have overly complex dashboards. That's something that we did to ourselves, unfortunately. We had a whole bunch of dashboards, and we tried to simplify by minimizing the number of dashboards we have. Unfortunately, what we ended up doing is just smashing those dashboards together. So instead of having a whole bunch of small dashboards, we now have 1 or 2, or actually 20 really large dashboards. So when our stakeholders are using it, they'll go there and they'll try and figure out, like, they just want to filter for EMEA. There's 50 filters they have to go through to find the one that will get them just their EMEA data. And so we spend a lot of time walking our stakeholders through how do they use the dashboard, how do they get the insights from the dashboard over and over and over again. We also have some marketers who are very data savvy. They love to look at data. They love to slice and dice data. They want the data in a spreadsheet so they can apply pivots on it. they don't have SQL skills, so they can't go in and pull the data themselves. We have to go grab the data, extract it. And that data is good for 2 days. After that, it needs to be refreshed. And so then we spend time refreshing. So there's just a lot of hand-holding we have to do and a lot of tasks we're doing that's not really value add. As a data strategist, as a big nerd, what I want to do is drive the business forward. I want to implement personalization at scale. I want to improve our machine learning models. I want to generate insights that actually drive the business forward. I don't want to do data extracts. So those are low-value things that we thought the Genie could help us with, is if we could take back 25% of our time, give all that work over to the Genie, then we can be able to accelerate the transformations that we're trying to deploy in the business. And so to do that, we decided we needed a couple of use cases, and there's a spectrum of the way we could have started. On one hand, we could have started tiny, and we could have put in one table into the Genie and been able to answer 2 or 3 questions. Not a lot of value in that. The other, which we thought about, was let's just throw all of our data. Let's take all of our tables, throw it in the Genie. The Genie will figure it out. It's like magic. But we pretty quickly realized that doing something like that would just provide more noise than signal. So we had to find the balance of how do we put enough data to where it's useful without having so much data it's overwhelming to the Genie. And we identified 2 primary stakeholders that would help us with this. One was our CMO. He would often come to us and ask us questions around account profiling. So he'll meet with a customer, and he'll need to know, does that customer use our Unity catalog? Does that customer use serverless? What events is that customer attending? So that when he goes to talk to them, he can have an intelligent conversation and talk to them about their particular businesses. And he could get that from the dashboards, but like I said, the dashboards are overly complex. It's not worth his time to spend 45 minutes futzing around on a dashboard when he can just ask us and we can give him an answer in 10 minutes. Very fast turnaround for the CMO. But we thought, what if we take that off of our plate? What if we give that over to a Genie, and then he can just ask the Genie any question he needs around account profiling and get that answer immediately and not have to wait for us, and we don't have to be distracted getting him what he needs in near real time. The other use case that we went with was our VP of demand gen. He's one of those people that likes to play with the data. He likes to pivot it. He likes to flip it upside down, turn it inside out, slice it and dice it. We were providing him data extracts, and that was time consuming. And anytime we would provide a data extract, after 2 or 3 days, he'd want to refresh because the data's stale. Makes sense. And so for that, we thought if we can work with him and get him on board, we can give him a Genie, and we would no longer have to provide those extracts to him. And the other benefit for him would be he doesn't have to create the pivots because the Genie can do the pivots in the back end and just give him the answer. So it alleviates a lot of the work he was doing, still gives him the same insights, alleviates the work that we were doing. And so to enable those 2 people, we only needed 3 data sets. So we started somewhat small, which was the account data, the contact data, and the engagement data. And we strategically picked those 2 people. So we picked the CMO and we picked a VP because we knew if we could make this work, they would be great champions at pushing the message down that the Genie's valuable, which actually did end up happening. Again, spoiler alert. Our CMO loved it after we released it, and he started pushing that message that, if I can use it, as a CMO, I can use this and get value and get insights. Anybody can use it, and everybody should be using it. So that was very beneficial. So if you go down the same journey, be strategic with the partners you work with for your initial use cases. Now we're going to get into the weeds a little bit, some of the technical details. The first thing we did, we threw those 3 tables into a Genie, and we just started asking questions. So very simple questions to very complex questions. What we found out pretty quickly was a lot of our complex logic was built into our dashboards, and it wasn't necessarily readily available to the Genie. One concrete example is we have nurture email campaigns. And to find those, we have to do wildcard searches. We have to look for an attribute like nurture, and we have to look where it's also not a partner. And so we fed that information to the Genie, and the Genie was able to figure out what we meant by nurture campaigns because we trained it. The problem is when we were asking more and more complex questions to the Genie. the Genie would sometimes lose that context, and it would lose the complex filter that it would need to put in place. And what we were seeing is it would just respond with the nurture piece, and it would ignore the partner piece or forget about the partner piece. So to resolve that, what we did is we baked that logic into the table itself. So instead of having we could have continued to train the Genie until it got it right, but what we did is said, let's create a calculated column. That calculated column has all of the logic built into it, and the end result is just true, false, yes, no, is it nurture, is it not? And then the Genie, as we started asking more and more complex questions, was able to leverage that field instead of having to remember all of that complex logic itself. And here you can see an example of how that worked. Before, it was trying to recreate that logic from the instructions we gave it, but it failed because it forgot about the partner piece. Afterwards, it was just leveraging that field that we gave it, and so it was getting the answer right every time. And as we asked more and more complex questions, it was continuing to get it right. The next thing we had to do was look at Unity Catalog. So we were early adopters of Unity Catalog. We were using it pretty much since it launched. We did not use it effectively initially. We had none of our tables documented. Absolutely nothing was documented. And we found out that the Genie would occasionally struggle because it didn't understand our business context as it relates to the data in the fields in the tables. So the first thing we did was apply the AI assistant and have that take a first pass at documenting all of the columns. And to be honest, it was maybe 10% that we kept untouched after doing that, 10 to 15. The rest we went in and added some more detail. Not to say the AI assistant is bad. The AI assistant provided comments that were, in my opinion, overly generic for the most part. So we had to go back and add the rich business context that we as humans know that the machine itself missed. And one example of where this came into play was our marketers were asking questions about Mexico. How many contacts do we have in Mexico? The Genie, very helpful, was looking for the country of Mexico, which makes sense. That's what the users asked about. Unfortunately, our data was stored with a 2-character country code. It wasn't the country name. So the Genie was returning 0 because, of course, it can't find the right country. After we added in those Unity Catalog comments, one of the comments for the country specifically was, it's the country code. So then Genie, after we made that update, Genie was then able to get it correct. So people would ask, how many contacts are there in Mexico? It would convert Mexico to MX and then look for MX instead of the full name. So made it smarter, made it better for the stakeholders. The next thing we did was add some SQL instructions. So specifically where this was helpful for us was with the trusted aspect of it. If you parameterize your queries, you can have Genie return a trusted result. And so a good example would be, how many contacts are there in EMEA? You write the question, you write the actual answer of what the SQL should be. And if you parameterize the region of EMEA, if somebody comes along later and asks that exact question, the Genie will use the query that you've written and mark it as trusted. So the stakeholders will know this is something that a human wrote, it's not something that the Genie wrote. So there's no chance of hallucination there. So you have more faith that the answer the Genie is giving is correct. And with the parameterization, somebody can ask about a mayor, or they can ask about APJ, and the Genie will swap it and still use that trusted tag because it's using the same base logic that an analyst actually put in there. And here's an example. Genie was getting the question correct either way, but the first way where we didn't have it parameterized, the answer was not being marked as trusted, but it was still the right answer. After we created a parameter on that, then the Genie was marking that as a trusted asset, and that's what we wanted the stakeholders to see so that they could trust the results for that particular question. The next thing we did was add some general instructions, and this is generally the order that we suggest based on our experience with the Genie. This is sort of in the order of importance. The general instructions are of lesser importance than the other, but they're still somewhat important depending on what you're trying to do. So for us, we use this to modify default behavior. One example is when people were asking about accounts, They would get the account ID and the account name, but they wouldn't get the account region. We wanted, by default, the Genie to return the region. So we added that as a general comment to, hey, anytime anybody's asking about accounts, include the region as well in the output. We also put in there some prompts for more information. When we let our stakeholders loose in this tool, one thing we saw immediately is the questions they were asking were often quite generic. One of the first questions we saw from more than one person was, which campaign is performing the best? That can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Performing best in what time frame? Performing best based on MQLs, ROI, or impressions or clicks. So what we did is we gave the Genie specific instructions to where if you see a question like that that's overly generic, like tell me about campaign performance, prompt the user for more information. And we put in there what we wanted the prompt to be of ask them if they mean ROI, ask them if they mean impressions, ask them what time frame they're looking at. So that next time they ask that question, they'll be prompted. And it'll help the users understand when and how they need to apply additional clarity to their questions so that hopefully they don't continue to ask those generic questions that give sometimes subpar results. And the tricky thing about that is the Genie is confident. The Genie will answer that question. If you just give it a generic question, what's the best performing campaign? Genie's going to give you an answer, and it's going to be really confident, but it may not be what you're expecting because you're missing out on that context. And so here's a brief before and after. You can see early on, it wasn't including the region by default, but we wanted to modify that default behavior, so we added that as an instruction. And then also we did put some acronyms in there so it knows CME and what that means, because sometimes our users were using CME, sometimes they were using comms, media, and entertainment, and they're interchangeable, so we gave some general instructions for the Genie about that interchangeability. Collecting feedback was important. We, I think, had a bit of a misstep when we started down this of collecting feedback. We were using a Slack channel at first, and it was really, really difficult for us to sort of triangulate between what our stakeholders were saying in Slack versus what we were seeing in the Genie. So we started using the Genie built-in functionality where users can just give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And if they give a thumbs down to the question, they can put in why. So if the Genie returns an answer that's unexpected or doesn't align with what they think the right answer should be, they can give it a thumbs down, and then they could say in the tool itself, here's what the answer should be. And then we monitor that, and we review that, and we make adjustments to the Genie's instructions based on the feedback from the users. Here's an example of that feedback. This one was somewhat interesting because of what the Genie was doing. So our data set had two region fields. Our campaigns had the planning region and the engagement region. Our stakeholders were asking a lot of questions about just region. So when we were testing this on the analytics side, we were asking questions the way we would write a SQL query. So we would ask a question about the planning region. We're using specific field names from the table. Or we would ask about the engagement region, again, using a specific field from a table, because that's what we do as analysts. Our stakeholders, when they got a hold of this, they don't know the field names. The marketers have never seen the inside of the database, so they're just asking about region. The Genie had two region fields to choose from. Again, Genie's very confident. It'll give you an answer. It was picking one at random, so sometimes it would pick one, sometimes it would pick the other. We saw that they were giving thumbs down a lot for the region, and so we asked them, what's going on with that? They said they don't even use the planning region. That's the one they don't use. They really care about the engagement region. All of their performance is based on where the engagement took place. So what we did here is we just ended up removing the planning field completely from the table, and we just left the engagement field. And what I want to call out here specifically is oftentimes we as people want to apply fixes by adding more. We could have fixed this by adding more instructions, by giving more feedback to the Genie. Instead, what we did is we removed a field. So sometimes, especially with the Genie and with LLMs and the way they work, keep in mind if you're going down this journey that sometimes removing is better than adding. It's always an option. And we leveraged benchmarks to identify when we had the Genie correctly dialed in. So what the benchmarks do is they allow you to write a question for Genie and then write the answer for Genie. So you write the question and you write the SQL answer that you expect as an output. You then run the benchmark within Genie, and what Genie will do is it'll read the question, it'll ignore what you put as the answer, and it'll try and generate its own answer. Once it generates its own answer, it'll compare that answer with what you provided. And so you can monitor quality over time. Ideally, what you do is you put in a wide range of questions, you run it until you get 100% accuracy from the Genie, and then you know it's dialed in. And what I was saying before, all of the previous steps is all about how do you make changes, how do you make changes. If you make a change over here, sometimes something over here will break. And without some sort of benchmark, there's no way for you to proactively know that. You'll know when the stakeholders complain or when the users say this isn't working anymore, what happened. But what this benchmarks allowed us to do was make a change, immediately run the benchmarks, and make sure we still had 100% accuracy. So it's almost like a regression test, and you could see, did these new instructions break something that was working previously? And you can see here, in this instance, this was an interesting example where the Genie was actually prompting for more. So we had given some instructions, and the Genie started prompting for more information, but really what we wanted to happen was for a default behavior to take place. So we saw that this was not returning the right answer. We went into our general instructions, and we made some changes around what the default behavior should be. And in this case, the default behavior should be to look at the total DBU consumption. Once we made that change, the Genie was able to then, once again, get an accurate result on that benchmark. And we knew that we had, once again, dialed it into the correct level of accuracy that we were expecting. This is something I was honestly surprised about. I did not think we would have to train the users as much as we did. This was, as an analyst, as a nerd, I speak robot. It's easy for me to talk to the LLM because that's the way my brain thinks. The marketers we're working with are not like that. They don't think like robots. They're very creative. The way they ask questions is completely different than the way that I was asking questions. Like, I would never ask a question of what campaign performs the best because I couldn't write that in a SQL because there's too much missing. So we had to go through and teach them that the Genie is not magic. It can't read your mind. You have to give it all of that context. And we walked them through also treating it like a collaborative partner. It's less a tool and more of a collaborator, because we were seeing some people ask a question. If they got a weird or unusual answer, they would just say, Genie's broken, Genie doesn't work, and they'd walk away. That's not the behavior we wanted. We wanted them to go back and ask the Genie again a follow-up question, just like you would if you have a new hire, and your new hire gives you a weird answer to a question you asked. You don't just say, this new hire's broken. You say, this new hire, you go back to them and you say, here's some additional context. You answered this way. That's not exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for this. And you partner with that person. And in the same way, we want our stakeholders and users to partner with the Genie. And that's some instructions that we had to give to them. And all of this is to say, it's not just about the technology. The Genie is a fascinating piece of technology. Successful deployment is not just about the technology, it's also about the people who are using it, so don't forget about them and bring them along as well and give them the knowledge they need to accurately and successfully use the Genie. For some people, it's just non-intuitive how to ask a good question. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a learning experience for all of us, and so we spend a lot of time instructing our users. We went out to a bunch of QBRs that they were hosting. We went out to individual team meetings. We hosted in-person events where we had everybody open their laptops and everybody ask a question. We'd have them ask a good question, a bad question. We'd show them how to get more context. So it was very hands-on, very white glove treatment. But that's what it took to get the marketers on board. This is just a brief slide, putting it all together so you can see we were able to get the Genie to answer good questions using all of the previous mentioned steps. So now it understands the jargon, it's using the foreign key primary keys, it's using the simplified values we baked into the table, it's returning a trusted query. So now the Genie is able to use everything that we've done and give us good results. All of that was just to get the initial 2 use cases. So that's a lot of work. And the reason I call that out is the Genie is great, but it's also not just sort of a throw tables at it and walk away. It's throw tables at it and then curate and refine and iterate until you get it to give you the responses you want. And it did take a lot of effort. I think the first 2 use cases took about 3 months for us to develop and deploy and get fully dialed in. Once we did, we expanded to 50 people. And again, we had to go through all of those same steps. So we added 50 people and we said, hey, start asking questions. They were asking questions, they were trying to get to the same answers as the previous two, but they would ask them in slightly different ways, and the Genie would give slightly different answers. And it's almost like a new vocabulary we had to train the Genie on. And so it's just more example queries, more instructions, more updates to Unity catalog. And these stakeholders also had requests for additional data. So they wanted to see performance. They wanted to see attribution beyond what we were already showing with accounts, contacts, and engagements. So we added 3 more tables, and that's where we landed today. There's 6 tables, so it's not a huge Genie. It's also not a tiny Genie. It's sort of right in the middle, and I think that sweet spot is where it's best to be, because it's enough for the stakeholders to answer 80–90% of the questions they might ever have around marketing data, but it's also not so much that we threw all of our tables in there and the Genie's getting confused. Once we had it dialed in for those 50 people, then we released it to a full 200, and that's when we did a lot of the training. So the first 2 use cases was about 3 months. The next use cases for these 50 people was about 2 to 2.5 months. And then when we rolled it out to all 200, that took a while only because we had to get in front of every team and we had to schedule those training sessions. But there wasn't a lot more iteration to be done after that. After the first 2 rounds, we pretty much had it dialed in on answering the questions in a good manner. And the business impact. So we were able to reclaim that 25% of the time. The 25% of the time that we were spending on doing data extracts and guiding people on how to use our dashboards, because our dashboards are overly complex. We took that time back. I would love to say that we're now spending it on PTO, on beaches, drinking Mai Tais. We're not. We're now focused more on driving those strategic projects that we want to focus on and that really make us excited as the marketing analytics team. So we're working on personalization at scale. We're working on improving our machine learning models. We're working on better insights and better governance of our data. So there's a lot that we can focus on to help drive the business forward that's not just these simple data extracts and answering one-off questions for the CMO. We now have the Genie take care of that low-level work for us so we can focus on higher value things. It's also helpful for our stakeholders. In the past, they would have to come to us and say, I can't figure out how to use this dashboard. They'd have to wait until we were available. We'd help them out, and they'd come back and have the same question later. Or if it was iterating with data extracts, they'd have to wait for those data extracts. Now they can just ask a question, get an answer. If they're using the dashboard and they're confused about how to apply a filter because there's 50 filters and it's insanity, they can just go to the Genie, ask whatever question they have in plain language, and then the Genie will give them that answer back. So they're happy because they can get exactly what they need when they need it. We're happy because all of that low-value ad work is now offloaded to the Genie, which takes care of it for us. And some key takeaways, if you're going to go down this path of launching your own Genie, I definitely recommend it, but expect that it's going to take time and it's going to take iterations. It's not going to be as simple as, like I said earlier, throwing data in and then the Genie just works. There's a lot of work you have to do both on the business side with the users and with the technology itself to get it up to speed and make sure it's accurately giving answers on a repeated basis. Definitely start small. Don't try and load all the data in there. If you try and put all the data in there from all of your tables, it's not going to work well. If you don't model your data correctly to work with how the Genie thinks, it's also not going to work very well. And I think the biggest bang for the buck that we saw was Unity Catalog. I'm going to keep harping on that. Unity Catalog was a quantum leap for us. Once we had everything documented, the Genie just got instantly smarter. And that is where we saw the biggest benefit for the least amount of effort, is just making sure we had all of our tables documented, which we should have done years ago, but nobody likes to do documentation, so it sort of fell by the wayside. Also add those SQL queries. The SQL queries are what give it the rich context it needs to understand how you answer questions that a person might ask. And then it can use that in novel questions that it hasn't seen before. It uses that context to create those novel answers. Train the users. That's important. We've already touched on that quite a bit. And then gather feedback. Initially, we were seeing people turning away. Like I said, they would use it, they would get a weird answer, they weren't happy. then they'd walk away. We wanted this feedback mechanism to be active so that they know if something's wrong, instead of just walking away, let us know, we'll work on it, we'll fix it, and then we'll get back to them and let them know it's better, it's working now, try it again, to keep them engaged. And so that's it. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I hope this has been helpful in instructing you guys on how we were able to launch and deploy and all of the work it went into launching and deploying a Genie space and the benefits we're seeing and where we had the Genie take over, which was those lower value tasks. Happy to answer any questions that any of you might have. All right, looks like that's it. Thank you all. Really appreciate the time.